There is a map drawn in 1513 that shows a coastline no one alive in 1513 had ever seen. A stretch of land at the bottom of the world, sketched in ink on gazelle skin, with rivers and bays and inland detail. 300 years before any ship reached it. And when a U.S. Air Force cartographer laid that old coastline against a modern seismic survey of the same region, he didn't find a rough match. He found the land as it looks underneath its ice. Land that has been buried, frozen, and invisible for thousands of years. That is the part historians hurry past. Because if that coastline is real, somebody mapped it while it was still bare. And the only place in the historical record that describes a great civilization vanishing under exactly that kind of catastrophe is a document most scholars treat as a fairy tale. That map is called the Piri Reis map, and it was found by accident. In 1929, scholars cataloging the old Ottoman palace in Istanbul pulled a fragment of parchment out of a forgotten bundle. 1/3 of a world map painted by a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis in the year 1513. On it, the Atlantic, the coast of Africa, the eastern edge of South America, drawn with proportions that were better than they had any right to be, and along the bottom, a long southern landmass that should not have been there at all. Here is what makes this different from every other old map. Piri Reis wrote notes in the margins. He told you where he got his information, and he said in his own hand that he compiled this chart from around 20 older source maps. Some of them, he wrote, went back to the time of Alexander the Great. Some he could not read. He was not the surveyor. He was the copyist. Whatever knowledge is frozen into that parchment, he inherited it. He was working from charts already ancient when he was born. And at least one of those charts is now lost to us completely. Before we go further, understand what's actually on the table here. 3 things. A coastline that appears to show a frozen continent while it was still warm. A civilization described in detail by an ancient source and then dismissed for 2,000 years. And a specific location sitting in plain sight that matches the description so precisely that the people whose job it is to explain it would rather change the subject. Take those 3 and lay them on top of each other, and a shape starts to appear. Start with the coastline, because it's the piece you can see with your own eyes. The bottom of the Piri Reis map shows land curving east off the tip of South America. In 1965, a history professor named Charles Hapgood took that curve to a team at a U.S. Air Force reconnaissance squadron. Men whose entire profession was reading terrain from above. They compared the map's southern coast to Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. Not the visible surface. The bedrock coastline, mapped by seismic sounding through nearly a mile of ice during a 1949 survey. Their conclusion, put in writing by the squadron's commander, was that the geographical detail on the map agreed with the results of the seismic profile. In plain language, a 1513 chart appeared to show the shape of a land that has been under ice since long before recorded history. For decades, scholars dismissed that as a coincidence forced by an overeager professor. And they have a serious point, which we will come back to, because it matters. But hold on to the strangeness for a moment. Antarctica was not sighted by any documented expedition until 1820. Its coastline has been sealed under ice for thousands of years. So how does a landmass that resembles its buried shape end up on a map assembled from charts that predate Columbus? Piri Reis didn't invent that southern coast. He copied it. The question is, who drew the original and what the world looked like when they did? Now turn to the ancient source, because it describes this exact scenario, not a myth, a record. Around 360 BCE, the Greek philosopher Plato set down an account he said came through the lawmaker Solon, who had gotten it from priests in the Egyptian city of Sais. The priests told Solon his people had forgotten their own history. And then they described a power that existed 9,000 years before Solon's time, a great island. Its position given precisely. Beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the strait we now call Gibraltar, out in the open Atlantic. An island, the priest said, larger than Libya and Asia combined. A naval empire that ruled the surrounding lands. Read that as geography, not legend. Beyond the Pillars of Heracles means out past Gibraltar, into the Atlantic. That is the ocean the Piri Reis map charts. Larger than Libya and Asia combined does not mean a small volcanic island in the Mediterranean, which is where cautious scholars like to place it. It means something on a continental scale, in the Western Ocean, in exactly the region the map's mystery coastline occupies. Plato wasn't writing a bedtime story with a moral. He was passing along at third hand an Egyptian record of a place and a catastrophe. And the catastrophe he describes is the specific telling detail. Because of how it ended. In a single day and a single night of misfortune, the account says, the island was swallowed by the sea and vanished. For centuries, that line was read as pure fantasy, a god's punishment, a flood of myth. Then modern geology caught up with it. We now know the last ice age ended in a series of violent pulses. As the great ice sheets collapsed, global sea levels rose more than 120 meters. Not gradually in every case, in sudden surges, meltwater pulses, when the ocean jumped meters in a human lifetime and drowned coastlines that people were living on. Whole landscapes went under. There is a drowned country under the North Sea called Doggerland, where Stone Age people hunted across open plains now 60 meters down. Trawlers still drag up their bone tools and the tusks of the animals they killed. It was mapped, it was inhabited, and then it drowned. Whole tribes watched their land turn to marsh, then to shallows, then to sea, inside a few generations. This is not theory, it is the settled science of what happened to the coastlines of the world when the ice let go. Plato's single day and night is compressed folk memory of something that genuinely happened to the human race. The details blur across 10,000 years of retelling. The core survives. The sea really did rise and eat the coast, and the people who lived on it really did have to run. And if you're the kind of person who needs to know where that coast was, subscribe now, because this channel follows the drowned edges of the ancient world every week, and this trail is only getting warmer. Because there is a specific place that matches Plato's description with an accuracy that should not be possible for a story someone made up. Here is where it gets strange. Plato didn't just say the island was big and far away. He described its shape, and he was oddly precise about it. At the center of Atlantis, he wrote, was a structure of concentric rings, alternating rings of land and water, circling a central point. He gave a count: 2 rings of land, 3 rings of water. He even gave a measurement, an outer dimension converting to roughly 23 kilometers across the inner rings. For 2,000 years, that read as ornamental fantasy, the kind of perfect geometry that proves a place was imaginary. Real cities are messy. Nobody builds a bullseye. Except there is a bullseye. In the desert of Mauritania, in West Africa, sits a formation called the Richat Structure, the Eye of the Sahara. From the ground, it is invisible, just ridges and sand. From orbit, it is a perfect set of concentric rings, alternating raised rock and sunken valley, circling a central point. Astronauts use it as a landmark. Its scale is the detail that stops people cold. The inner ring system of the Richat measures close to that same 23 kilometers Plato specified. 2 rings of high ground, valleys of low ground between them, the beds where water once ran. The geometry Plato called impossible is sitting in the Sahara right now, at the correct size, and it is west of Gibraltar, in Africa, in the general direction the Egyptian priests pointed. Mainstream geology has an answer, and it's a real one. The Richat is an eroded dome, an uplift of rock pushed up from below and then carved by wind and water over 100 million years into those rings. Natural, not built. And that would settle it, except for what's scattered across the surrounding desert. Seashells, whale bones, not fully fossilized, lying in open sand hundreds of kilometers from any ocean. Freshwater lake beds, dated by radiocarbon to between roughly 15,000 and 8,000 years ago, when the Sahara was green and wet. Acheulean stone tools worked into the outer rings, proof that humans lived here, at the eye, across enormous spans of time. This was not always desert. Water ran through those rings. People stood inside them. And long, straight scars run east to west across the surrounding land. The kind of striation a massive surge of water would carve if it came through fast and hard. Plato added details that read strangely well against this place. He wrote that Atlantis had elephants, a specific animal for a Greek to mention about a distant land. West Africa had elephants. He wrote that its people mined a red metal they called orichalcum, gleaming like fire, second in value only to gold. The rocks of the Richat and the surrounding Mauritanian shield are heavy with ore, and Mauritania is a mining country to this day. He described rich soil that gave 2 harvests a year, fed by water flowing from the center outward. That is, the green Sahara of the African humid period. The wet window, the radiocarbon dates fall inside. None of it proves a city stood there. All of it fits a real place at a real time, better than an invented one has any reason to. That's the shape Plato drew. That's the water and land in rings. That's a populated place, near the sea in its wet era, marked by evidence of a violent flood. And it sits at the western edge of Africa, on the Atlantic side, precisely where a map maker charting the far ocean would need to reach. Now, connect it back to the parchment. The Piri Reis map preserves lost knowledge of the Atlantic's far coasts from source charts no one can find anymore. Plato preserves an Egyptian memory of a ringed island civilization, out in that same ocean. Destroyed by a flood, the geology confirms was real. The map and the dialogue are 2 survivors of the same drowned information, reaching us through different hands. And this is the point where the record goes quiet in a way that starts to feel deliberate. The Piri Reis map is a fragment. 1/3 of the original survives. The rest, the section that would have shown more of that southern coast and whatever lay beyond it, is simply gone. Lost. The source charts Piri Reis names, the ancient ones he copied from, do not exist in any archive on Earth. The Columbus chart he cites is lost. The maps from the Age of Alexander are lost. Every upstream document that could tell us who first drew that frozen coastline has vanished, and we are left holding the one downstream copy that happened to survive in a palace bundle for 400 years before anyone noticed it. When Hapgood's Air Force analysis came out, it was quietly folded into a footnote, and the professor spent the rest of his career waved off as a crank. The trail keeps ending at the same place. Every time the evidence points out into the Atlantic, the source that could confirm it is missing. Now, let's be honest with each other, because you deserve the real picture and not just the thrilling one. Does any of this prove Plato's Atlantis was real? A ringed continent full of people, mapped from the sky in the Ice Age? Probably not. And you should walk away from anyone who swears that it does. The skeptics have earned their say. The southern coast on the Piri Reis map is very likely the real coast of South America, bent sideways because the admiral ran out of room on his gazelle skin and turned the coastline to fit the parchment. That is a genuine, boring, well-documented habit of old map makers. The Richat Structure really is a 100-million-year-old geological dome, far too old and far too landlocked to be a sunken island city. And the seismic match to Antarctica has never held up under stricter modern surveys of the bedrock. Every single clue, taken alone, has an ordinary explanation. That is true, and it matters, and I won't pretend otherwise. But here is what the ordinary story still can't do. It can't explain why an ancient Egyptian record, passed to a Greek philosopher, describes a ringed island the exact size of a formation in the Sahara that nobody could see properly until we had satellites. It can't explain why a memory of the sea rising in a single day survived for thousands of years and then turned out to match the real sudden meltwater floods that ended the Ice Age. Even stripped down to its most cautious version, this story is enormous. Because at minimum, it means human beings preserved an accurate memory of a real catastrophe and a real drowned world across 10,000 years of retelling. Until the ink on a Turkish admiral's map and the words of a Greek dialogue quietly pointed at the same ocean. They weren't guessing, they were remembering. Somewhere out past Gibraltar, or under the sand at the edge of Africa, a coastline that people once lived on went under. The Piri Reis map holds a copy of a chart no one can find. The eye of the Sahara holds the shape of Plato's rings and the shells of a sea that isn't there anymore. The one full map that could settle it is missing its other 2/3. The source charts are gone, and the desert keeps its silence, staring up at the satellites that finally learned to read it. The rings are still out there in the sand. The map is still behind glass in Istanbul, showing a coast it shouldn't know. And somewhere in the Atlantic that Plato pointed to, the sea is still holding on to whatever it swallowed in a single day and a single night. If you want to know what else went under when the ice let go, watch the next investigation on screen right now.